Good evening. It's good to see this number out. So we're picking up in lesson 11 and talking about specific aids that we can use in helping us teach our Bible classes, and just looking at some advantages and disadvantages. I want to go through these rather quickly so that we can get to lesson 12, talking about discipline. So we left off where we were fixing to start talking about some of the specific aids, and the first one was Bible storybooks. And one of the things that Brother Waldron points out at the very beginning is Bible storybooks are very good for younger kids. They're very good for families to use at home whenever we're trying to teach our young ones. And obviously, if you are not as experienced as a teacher, they can help you as far as relaying the story to the kids. And so that can be something that can be an advantage to someone who doesn't have a whole lot of experience with kids in general or with teaching in general. But there are a lot of disadvantages, and I think he kind of leans toward not using them. It's kind of more of a crutch in the beginning, and hopefully you can develop your storytelling abilities to where you wouldn't need them, because obviously the important thing is making sure that you are telling the story that God intended for us to tell out of the Bible. He mentions how it's hard to maintain eye contact, and so whenever you're studying with any group, the less eye contact you have, the less engaged they're going to be. And if all you're doing is reading straight from a storybook, then unless you're just this awesome orator with being able to read, you're going to lose them. And obviously, if you lose the kids, then you're going to have more issues with what we're going to talk about in lesson 12, discipline. He says it takes a skilled reader to read it properly with enthusiasm, and we talked about how you really got to be enthusiastic, especially with the younger kids, keeping them engaged. And then if you read the story in an exciting way, you can make your own story and don't need a book. So if you can be enthusiastic with your telling of the stories, not all of us are as great as Papa Melton with telling stories, but he's got a little more experience than some of us, and so you can practice and you can get better. And this is one of those things where if you get in front of a mirror or you record yourself, you can get better at it. So there can be some benefits to using it, especially if you're teaching for the very first time. But one of the points that he makes that I think we need to make sure we pay attention to is you can't just grab a storybook, Bible storybook off the shelf, walk into Bible class and think, okay, now I'm going to read this story. You've not even checked it compared to what the Word actually says. And so it's just with any man-made book, even with a commentary, like we've talked about, you have to compare the story book to the Word. And if the storybook is not accurate with the Word, then you need to throw it out. It's of no benefit whatsoever. So that's the key thing. And obviously, Bible storybooks are used to try and efficiently tell a story, and so they don't always include all of the details that might be necessary to get across to some of the young ones. So just something that they are available to use, but you got to be careful with them. You must use Bible storybooks with the same discretion that you use with all other works by uninspired human beings. Read it carefully before reading it to children. Is it accurate? Is it teaching the lesson the Holy Spirit was teaching? Is every detail correct? You must know the details yourself to be able to know whether the book is accurate. And that goes back to the fact that we have to study to show ourselves approved. Because if you're just reading it and you don't actually know yourself and you're not going back and checking, then you're not going to know. So be very, very careful about that. So some ways that he talks about that you can use Bible storybooks in the classroom, small classes with possibly only a small child, and so if you're in that type of setting and you don't have a lot of students, something that you can do. I know some teachers have used them as a review, and they'll use it as one of their methods of telling the story, and that is something that can be useful, a time filler in the event that you run out of material, and hopefully you don't get to that point. We've talked about prepare and over-prepare so that you've got enough material so that you're not looking for some kind of time filler. All right, so flannel graphs, he mentions in the flannel board is what I've always referred to it as. Put the board up on the wall and you've got all your flannel pieces. So some of the advantages is it's very effective for younger classes. And I mean, kids like touching things, especially the younger kids. And so if this is a way that you can help them kind of tell the story themselves or repeat the story by using the flannel board, that's something that obviously is more effective for the younger classes. Attention is focused longer while watching the story unfold, while hearing it told. And so we've talked about engaging as many of the senses as possible. And that's going to help whoever the student is actually remember it better. And so they're going to be hearing it and they're going to be seeing it. And if you're letting them kind of help tell the story, they're actually using their hands too. And so you've got feeling it there. And so using as many senses as possible. And so the children are actively engaged by themselves retelling the story. And so you've told the story maybe once or twice, and now you're letting them kind of tell the story through the flannel graph or the flannel board. And you've got quite a bit of flexibility with the flannel board setup, and so it's a lot easier to change things up to kind of match what you're needing with each particular story or each particular activity. So some of the disadvantages, and if you've never bought a flannel board set from the very beginning, you actually won't know this. We had to buy a whole new set several years ago because the set that we had kind of got used for things that now we couldn't use it as a flannel set anymore. So we bought a new set, and it's very time consuming, cutting out all of the little pieces. Now once you have that done, it's done with, but in the very beginning it can be very time consuming, and they are very expensive. I don't know what they are now, but I remember when we had to purchase that new set, I was like, wow, this is pretty expensive. But being that it is that they are made out of flannel, they're pretty durable, and so it's something that should last a very long time. And he talks about, buying a cheap set versus a more expensive set, and how long that it might last, and how long you're planning on it lasting. He says there's not enough flannel graph material in the market to cover all the stories of the Bible, and so there's a lot of things that you can use it for, but not everything. And so just something to think about. And one of the arguments that people make with any of these aids that you might use that are depicting, someone, well, we don't know what they look like. And yes, we don't know what they look like, but again, we're just trying to tell a story and help the kids understand that it's real, that these things are, in fact, real. These are real Bible characters. And so if you need to make that point, make the point. So he talks about models, and while models aren't necessarily needed for all of the Bible stories that we're going to be telling, there are some parts of the Bible that it comes in very handy whenever you have a model. And I thought about the Bible class that we're doing on Hebrews, and Norm put up the pictures of the tabernacle whenever we were discussing that a few weeks ago. And for us as adults that have probably looked at the depiction of the tabernacle many, many, many times, that's good enough, but it helps to be able to see it. With a kid, that for the first time they're trying to visualize what you're talking about with the tabernacle, it's great to have an actual model of the tabernacle and the way that it was set up. So in that situation, it can be very beneficial. I think this is one of the things. I just wanted to check one thing. Pretty sure this is where he is talking about it's very important. This is a very important thing, especially if you grew up in Tennessee. And in the Bible, you're reading about, Samson and him tearing down the pillars. And a kid may hear you talking about the pillars, and he's thinking, we're about to have a pillar fight. That's how we say pillow in Tennessee is pillar. And so the kids might be confused when you're talking about pillars. And they're thinking, well, I'm about to go lay my head down. And so if you have an actual model, this cylindrical column, this stone column, that's a pillar. And this is what Samson pulled down. And so in that situation, it's very important to have a model, something that they can actually see. So again, if it's something that's going to help you get the point across, or it's going to help them understand the reality of what was going on, or what the situation was in that particular story, then something that definitely you need to use. You got to make sure, and this is with, again, anything that we're doing with Bible class, we're not trying to create distractions, and so make sure that it's not going to be something that is a distraction, because that's going to pull kids away from the emphasis and the point of what they need to get out of it. Maps are something that are very important, and again, one of the things that maps are going to help us get across is every story in the Bible took place somewhere, and it took place at a real place. And so being able to show the kids on a map, even from a very young age, kids understand, okay, well, we live in Cookeville, well, we live in Putnam County, we live in Tennessee, we live in the United States, and they understand all of this. Well, when we're trying to describe to them where he was living, and then where he moved, and we are talking to them about the promised land, this is actual land. This is physical land that is real. This is a real story. It took place in a real place. And so it's very good to be able to have these maps. And I will tell you, we have a great resource on the OneDrive where we have maps from Genesis to Revelation. We've got all of Paul's journeys, and they're really good maps. And we've got blank maps that you can use to help the kids if you're doing a history and geography type study. And so that resource is available on the OneDrive. So if you are teaching, especially whenever we start back with Genesis and we're starting to go through the Old Testament, teachers use that as a resource. Every historical event happens somewhere. The place fits on a map. And again, as we are telling the stories of the Bible, we've got to make sure that we are emphasizing that these are real people, these are real places, these are real events that mean something to us, that fit in the timeline of the life of Christ. And it's very important for us to understand. These are a couple of examples of maps that I just pulled off of the OneDrive. And one of the things that you got to pay attention to, whenever you're talking to the kids, is obviously the scale. So this is a large scale map, and that little circle right there now is this big map. But we've got these maps, and again, we've got blank maps that the kids can use, so take advantage of those. When reviewing and studying maps, be sure to look at the scale, again, so that you can kind of help the kids understand. All right, charts, something that it can be important for all ages, but especially even for older kids. And so this can be drawings that are going to help illustrate, whatever story that you're trying to tell. It can be a list of characters that you're wanting the kids to memorize, the 12 sons of Jacob, the judges, or some list and charts that you can create. Obviously, verses that maybe you want the kids to memorize can be in a chart form. Books of the Bible. I mentioned it at the beginning of children's training. We tend to focus on the younger kids with learning the books of the Bible. And a couple of weeks ago after Bible class, Zoe had come to me and said that Jesse had asked her to say the books of the Old Testament. And this kind of is going to get into our next aid too with songs. And so she was like, it was very hard for me to say them because I'm so used to singing them. And so you got to stop for a second. But I was like, that's great. And that's what I told the younger kids. You see, even the older kids are having to do these things in Bible class. And it's important that we know the books of the Bible. And so you can have that in chart form, the apostles' names. You've got all of these things that you can use with having these charts, and they're very easy to make, very cost-effective to use. So charts are something that can be used very easily. One of the things that he does mention is we tend to be sentimental about our charts, especially if we make something and we have it hanging on the wall in the Bible classroom, and we think that it looks great. Sometimes we can be sentimental, and we just want to leave it up there. And so make sure that you don't keep stuff up there just because you're being sentimental about it. Our eyes quit seeing things that have been there too long, and that's another thing. When kids walk into a classroom, and it's the same setup that's been there for 2 years, and they quit looking at the wall. It doesn't mean anything to them any longer. So that's just something to think about. Blackboards, we don't have blackboards anymore. We have dry erase boards. That tells you how long ago I guess this book was written. This is by far the most versatile aid that you can have, and all of our Bible classrooms have a dry erase board. And obviously you can do a lot with the dry erase board in helping the kids kind of see different parts of the story that you're wanting to see. And again, that goes back to using as many senses as possible. So you're telling the story, but you're also showing them something on the whiteboard. We've talked about songs before, and from a very early age, kids are great at learning Bible stories through song. And again, they learn the books of the Bible. This is ironic, but speaking of Zoe, we have a video. Pretty sure she was 2. I think she was between 2 and 3, and we were up here cleaning the church building, and she was down in the little kids' classroom, and I had walked in on her, and she was saying the books, or singing the books of the Bible. And so from a very early age, kids can learn these things, and so they can be very beneficial for helping to teach the kids. And that's what we're told to do whenever we sing together. Ephesians 5:19, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody with your heart to the Lord. We're to teach and admonish one another with songs, Colossians 3:16 and 17. James 5:13, is anyone among you suffering? Then he must pray. Is anyone cheerful? He is to sing praises. And the kids, again, can learn so much through songs. And we as adults can too. I mean, hopefully on the Lord's Day when we're worshiping God, that we are learning and we're admonishing one another through songs, and so they can be invaluable. We did a class, and we still have this set up, it's called Singing Through the Bible, where for a whole quarter, the premise was you're learning the 17 time periods through singing of songs. And again, I think that it was great for the kids, but can be beneficial for us as adults as well. So if there are songs that you don't know, then YouTube's a great resource. A lot of these moms know songs too, and so you can ask for help from them. So he mentions there, listen to a 7-year-old. He may choose the hardest song in the book to lead and then throw his head back and sing all 4 parts with all the abandon that only a child can achieve. Let him sing. Do not correct him. Perhaps his little song from his pure, sincere heart reaches the throne of heaven quicker than the songs our stilted, well-modulated voices produce during the typical service. Don't judge a kid whenever he's singing with all his heart. And to me, there's nothing more beautiful than the little kids and hearing them singing, especially in our worship services, when they're not embarrassed, they're not ashamed, they are singing with everything that they've got. And we seem to be so caught up in how do I sound, but I don't sound very good, so I better sing quiet. Now, this is one of them we need to be more like a child. Projectors obviously are a big one, so we have the projector up here. Downstairs we have the TVs, which act as projectors for your phone or for your iPad or for your computer. And so you can use them in so many different ways, and I think that they are utilized quite a bit downstairs, obviously with pictures, presentations. I know that there are some YouTube videos that actually tell Bible stories that the teachers sometimes use that can be very beneficial to especially those that are younger. And so a projector has so many uses that can really help aid us in our Bible classes. He says there, be sure to preview any film strip, slide, or video before using it. Again, that goes back to we're comparing everything to the Word. And we've got to make sure that we know the Word in order to be able to test everything by the Word. If you have taught error by showing your video, then you have done much more harm than good. It would have been far better for you to have used a less effective teaching method and taught the truth. This goes back to, I love how he's pretty blunt. So a lot of times, maybe we're running out of things to do, or we think we're running out of things to do. Well, let me just throw a video on, and we've not even looked at it. If you throw a video on and it's teaching error, then you've got a big problem. And so make sure that we are not allowing that to happen. Copiers obviously are invaluable whenever you are trying to print out material for your students. Now, a lot of times we have, workbooks that have everything kind of self-contained. With a lot of the younger classes, we don't have those. And so a copier and a printer are invaluable. One of the things that I will mention is we have to be diligent to make sure that we're being good stewards of what we do have. All right? So ink for the printer downstairs, if you get the color and the black and white, we're talking several $100s. And so I would just say we don't have to print everything in color. If it can be just as effective in black and white, then print it in black and white. Don't print it in color just for the sake of printing in color, okay? And it's something that, again, we have this as a resource, and we're blessed to have this as a resource, and it helps all of our Bible classes, it helps our teachers, but make sure that we're being good stewards of the things that we do have. So he talks about, this is really your time to be creative, and whenever you are developing activities, coming up with activities for Bible classes, this is your time to really be creative. So this is a comic that I had seen. We'll end with this. It says, "Do you have an idea for your story yet?" It says, "No, I'm waiting for inspiration." You can't just turn on creativity like a faucet. You have to be in the right mood. What mood is that? Last minute panic. Don't get in that situation. All right, we talked about that. All right. Yes, sir, Mr. Milton.
This is so important because no matter the age, we all suffer from an attention span struggle, and even the youngers even more. So having these type of things break up the variety, it just helps all of us to have that attention span to where we can focus and concentrate more. And even the preachers and teachers using a verbal example or changing the scenery of applying a story of personal experience or something breaks up that attention span, and it keeps people's attention much better.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's something that you need to pay attention to as a Bible class teacher. And, we've talked about not being set in our ways. And if whatever way we're using doesn't seem to be reaching the kids and they seem to just be bored out of their mind, then you've got to be willing to change things up. And it may be something that it doesn't happen all the time, but you're in the middle of a Bible class and you're looking at everybody's eyes and you're like, I don't think anybody is with me. In that situation, that's the time. Change things up a little bit. Get everybody back engaged to focus on what the story at hand is, what the topic at hand is, and that way that you can move on with engaged students instead of kids that are just giving you a blank stare. All right, so discipline. This is a very, very critical lesson as a Bible class teacher, something that we probably don't talk about enough. Turn over to Proverbs 13 in verse 24. So what I'd like to do kind of at the beginning before we get into the material that Brother Waldron has prepared for us is just kind of look at biblical discipline and what we actually read about in the scriptures whenever we read about discipline. So Proverbs 13:24. Andy, can you read that for us?
(13:24). But he who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly.
All right, so growing up, I knew what the rod was. It's that wooden paddle. And I almost put a picture of this up because the last time I was at my mom and dad's, I took a picture of the paddle. And I have to be careful because now we're on YouTube and everything is recorded. Like my mom and dad could go back and watch this, and so I got to be very careful. But my dad did break the paddle on me one time, and it was a wooden paddle that was only about 3/8 of an inch thick. And so after that, he went and got a piece of oak, and it's 1 inch thick, and that's what's still hanging up on my mom and dad's wall. Of course, they're saying now they wouldn't ever use it on the grandkids, but it sure got used on me a little bit and John a lot. And so I think about this, and it's obviously one that we talk about when we're talking about disciplining our children. But what does that actually mean, this Hebrew word that is translated there, discipline, in Proverbs 13:24? So the Hebrew word, it means chastisement, figuratively reproof, warning, or instruction. Also restraint, chastening, chastisement, check, correction, discipline, doctrine, instruction, rebuke. Turn over to Hebrews chapter 12. And Tiffany, if you could read Hebrews 12, 5 through 11 for us.
And you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you endure God. God deals with you as with sons, for what son is there whom his father does not discipline? How far did you say, Jason?
Through 11.
11. But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness.
Whenever you're talking about discipline, this is a great passage to go to. There's a whole lot of discipline in here. And one of the things that I want to point out, we're going to look at these. So there's a Greek word here, 3809. There's 3810 and 3811. So they're all a little bit different, and they're all translated discipline in this passage. And so 3809, and I'm not going to try to pronounce the Greek pronunciation, but this is tutorage, that is education or training by implication, disciplinary correction, chastening, chastisement, instruction, nurture. And we're going to keep reading through these, but one of the things I really want us to see and to understand, my mind, when I immediately hear discipline, the picture that I have ingrained in my mind is my dad coming at me with a paddle. Is that included? Yes, that can be included. But that's not the entire realm of discipline that we need to be focused on as Bible class teachers. I don't think anybody's going to go after the kids with a paddle, but we all have to have discipline within our classes. But notice this education or training. We've already read this instruction. So 3810 says a trainer, that is teacher, or by implication discipliner, which corrected, instructor. And then 3811, to train up a child, that is educate, or by implication discipline by punishment, chasten, instruct, learn, teach. There is this idea of training. Okay, so did my dad whip me? Yeah. Was it just to whip me? No, it was for discipline. It was for training. It was for correction. And so if you actually think about it, us as Bible class teachers, we should be disciplinarians because we are trying to educate. We're trying to train. Now, sometimes with that, as we'll talk about, when you've got a problem child, there needs to be some punitive punishment. And we'll talk about maybe what that needs to be. But when we look at biblical discipline, it's not all about the granny going out and getting the switch off the peach tree. That is included, but that's not everything. Romans 2 verse 20 says a corrector, some translations say instructor of the foolish, a teacher of the immature, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and of the truth. And for sake of time, we're not going to be able to go through all of these, but you want to read about discipline and biblical discipline. These are great passages to go to. Obviously, there's a lot of wisdom that we find in the Proverbs in regards to discipline, not just the passage that we read there at the beginning. And I can share all of these with you. if you would like a copy of them. 1 Timothy 4, verse 7, exercise yourself toward godliness. That's the New King James translation. Train yourself for godliness is the ESV. Train yourself to be godly is the NIV. Discipline yourself for the purpose of godliness is the New American Standard. So again, this idea of training, of instructing, of disciplining our bodies. This is what some of the commentators have written in regards to 1 Timothy 4, verse 7. So Barnes says, cultivate piety and seek to become more holy. Barclay says, Timothy is told that as an athlete trains his body, so the Christian must train his soul. Sounds pretty good with what we're trying to accomplish with Bible classes. And BBC says such exercise involves reading and studying the Bible, prayer, meditation. So again, this whole aspect of teaching involves discipline. That is biblical discipline. And so I just wanted to make sure that we see that. And the value of such discipline is now in verse 8. For bodily discipline is only of little profit, but godliness is profitable for all things, since it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. Why are we disciplining our bodies? Why are we training? Why are we educating these kids? Is it because we want them to live great with their fellow classmates or with the world? Yes. But again, that's not the main focus. We're training them, educating them for the life to come. When we step into a Bible class, we're trying to teach souls, and we're trying to set them up for the life to come. And this goes back to the very beginning when we talked about humanism. All of our teaching, all of our training, all of our educating is focused on the life and eternal. So in general terms, discipline means any training intended to develop moral character or produce a pattern of behavior. Training that corrects, molds, or perfects the mental faculties or moral character. So again, this all goes back to the all-encompassing discipline, biblical discipline, what that means. And so I just wanted to kind of get this out in front and for something for us to be thinking about whenever we're talking about discipline just in general, this overall view of training and educating that we are hoping to accomplish. So now getting into the material that Brother Waldron's got. So he mentions that the ability to maintain good discipline is one of the fundamental attributes a good teacher must have. And it's key that you maintain discipline within your classroom so that everybody is able to learn, everybody is able to receive the training and to be taught. And what we are ultimately trying to teach them as well, especially from a very young age, is reverence for God. And so whenever we're coming together for Bible class, we're coming together to study God's Word, to learn more about God and what He would have us to do. And so we have to teach them and train them. And obviously this is something that is the responsibility of the parents, but we play a key role as Bible class teachers that we help these kids understand reverence for God. And so we have to make sure that we're doing everything that we can within our Bible classes to make sure that we are doing just that. He says, no matter what age you are teaching, do not allow irreverence for God to go unchallenged. If any student is showing irreverence toward God, we don't just gloss over it or just act like we didn't hear it. That can be damaging to the entire class. And so do not allow God to be irreverence to be shown toward God in any way during your Bible classes. It's a very, very important thing. Don't let the thought of a child not coming back to your class keep you from rebuking them when they are being disrespectful or irreverent. And that's obviously toward God, toward you. I think a lot of times we are in these situations and it's like, I don't want to get the kid in trouble, and so we'll let things just kind of slide, and maybe we do have the thought, well, if I get on them too hard, maybe they're not going to want to come back, and then they'll never come back. But if you're continuing to allow a child to be disrespectful, either to you, to God, or to whoever, then you're ultimately going to lose them anyway, and you're going to lose the whole class. So he says you will win no battle by allowing misbehavior. So you shouldn't allow it at home, and you shouldn't allow it in your Bible classes at all. So he talks about being a strict disciplinarian, And I know that just the thought of that probably is not something that is too pleasant for everybody. And hopefully it's not too pleasant for anybody. I don't know that anybody that just loves to. Although growing up, I did think my dad loved being a disciplinarian. He probably wouldn't say that now. But sometimes as fathers and as mothers and as teachers, we need to make sure that we are being that. Determined to control the group so that learning can take place. That's the most important thing about Bible class, is that learning is taking place. And if you've got a disruptive class, a disruptive student, then there's going to be no learning that's taking place. And so the time is wasted for everyone. So be pleasant. And sometimes that can be difficult whenever you've got a difficult student that you're trying to deal with. But you've got to be firm in the way that you handle the class. And this is from the very beginning. You can't come in as a softie and then halfway through the class, halfway through the quarter, think, now I'm going to put my foot down. Well, you've already shown that they can step all over you, and so it's going to be a lot harder now to get control of the class if you let it happen in the beginning. Set guidelines, and I think that this is important for teachers, and obviously for younger students, it's hard to walk in and say, okay, these are the rules, but you can have certain rules, and then as the kids get older, you need to have a set of guidelines. This is what you can expect if you come to my Bible class. Do not deviate from that. So what happens with your kids if you tell them, okay, this is the consequences, and then they do the thing that you said they were going to have these consequences, and then they don't suffer the consequences? Well, they're not going to be scared about any consequences because, well, you didn't punish me before, so you got to make sure that you don't deviate from the rules and that you're always consistent and that you're fair. And that can be difficult whenever you've got a problem kid, but you've got to make sure that you're being fair to everybody. So this is something that I had pulled from a book called Teaching the Heart of the Matter from John Smith. He says, discipline is far more than simply punishing a student when he misbehaves or dealing with some undesirable action on the part of the student. Discipline comes from the same root word as disciple. It refers to a process of learning, training, and growing. It is a systematic method of training, molding, correcting, or perfecting the intellect and moral character of an individual. Discipline is the process of helping a person learn self-control. And that's something that I don't think that we think about too often, but we're trying to help them learn self-control as we are trying to teach them. So it's something that is very important. There's a couple other things that I had found in regards to instructive discipline versus punitive discipline. So instructive discipline, this type of discipline is preventative in nature. It seeks to prevent problems before they happen. Instructive discipline will provide the student with boundaries and expectations. Paul provided the Ephesians instructive discipline when he declared to them the whole purpose of God in Acts 20, verse 20 and verse 27. And so you have to, again, set these guidelines, set these boundaries so that they know, because if there are no boundaries set, then you can't have any expectations if you haven't set any boundaries. It's hard to hold someone accountable when they don't know what the expectations are. And so you have to let them know what the expectations are. Punitive discipline is corrective in nature. When instructive discipline is not effective, it's necessary to use punitive discipline. Punitive discipline is used correctly will save souls. It is not pleasant to receive or dispense. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful but sorrowful, yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Hebrews 12 and verse 11. So hopefully we're doing more instructive discipline than punitive discipline. But sometimes we may have to resort to the punitive discipline. So he talks about, in the book, asking the question, what is discipline? If there is chaos in a room, there can be no logical thinking taking place. And again, if one student is causing a disruption, then everybody is going to be distracted, and so it's going to be hard for anybody to actually think or learn. If there is no learning, then there's not any teaching going on, and he's made that point very clear multiple times throughout the book. If there's no learning, then you're not teaching. And many problems can be prevented by an alert teacher. And so this kind of goes back to one of the first lessons where it talks about learning the students, know the students, because you're going to know, I'm not going to call any names out, you're going to know, if you know the students, the ones that you need to kind of keep an eye on. And if you're alert and you're making eye contact constantly, sometimes you can head things off before they ever happen. And it's very easy for parents and children, like you can give your kids a look and they know, okay, they know what I was thinking and what I was about to do, and I better not do it. And so be alert, and hopefully you can prevent things from happening by being alert. So some general rules for good discipline: keep the child's mind busy. Don't be boring. And again, that goes back to kind of what Brother Melton was saying. We have to keep them engaged. We can't have them bored out of their mind, and so we have to keep them engaged. Make sure that we are maintaining things happening within the Bible class period, and you don't have minutes go by where there's nothing happening, because then you will lose a class. And so don't have these dead moments. Again, this goes back to making sure that you prepare enough material to fill the time. A child's mind is constantly busy, and so their minds are always going, and so make sure that you are controlling their minds throughout the class and giving them something to focus on. And a lot of that, again, goes back to eye contact, because if you are making eye contact with the students, you know that they're engaged, and they know that you're watching. And so it helps to know, if you know somebody's watching you, it's a lot harder to get away with something if they're watching you. So keep his hands empty, mostly. So empty hands produce better listeners, and this is most of the time, and I mentioned in here, and he talks about this a little bit later, but he doesn't mention in this section. But I will fully admit, I don't know the best for children that are ADD or ADHD. In that situation, you really need to talk to the parents, work with the parents in that situation, because sometimes their minds can focus better on what's being taught if they actually have something in their hands. Save pencils and crayons until they are necessary for an activity, and so don't just hand them out. He mentions in there the kids might start eating the crayons. If you got any kids eating crayons down there, you need to talk to the parents real quick. And then I'll pick up with this next time. He talks about not allowing purses, toys, etc., and we'll get into that. And just so everybody knows, if your kid's ever in my class, they don't get phones. We don't do devices in my classes. And I don't want to hear the excuse, well, that's my Bible. No. You come to my class, you're going to use an actual Bible, because you're not going to be sitting there trying to Snapchat and Facebook and InstaSpace and whatever else you're trying to do in my Bible class. So we'll talk about that starting next week. So next week we'll finish up 12, and then let's go ahead and go to, we're going to start talking about parents and babies. So go ahead and read the child's level, but we've talked about that several times throughout the class, but we're not going to discuss that in class, but go ahead and read that, and then start reading parents and babies. Thanks, everybody.